Hey, I'm Brian Ogilvy, author of How to Conquer Yourself, Discipline and Willpower for the Conscious Creative Thinker. And today we have a short Q&A going on, so fire away.
I found How to Conquer Yourself very beneficial to my needs in the past and also in present times today. However, I would like to highlight Chapter 7.
Yes. Well, Chapter 7 is called How to Cultivate Willpower. So I'm talking about willpower not in the general sense when most people think of willpower. Most people think of willpower in a vague way. Willpower in the terms of staying focused, in terms of having time management skills, having a long-term motivation, and having this sense of productive energy towards your goals, which is good. When we say willpower generally, we're talking about just, willpower. But specifically in Chapter 7, when I'm talking about willpower, what I mean is the ability to cultivate energy. Because if you think about willpower in very scientific terms, it's essentially your ability to make decisions. The ability to say, I'll eat this thing rather than this thing, because I logically know that this is the healthier thing for me. Or I'll work on this project rather than, surf the internet, because logically I know that working on this project is going to be more conducive to the future that I want. So when you begin to think about willpower as your capacity to make decisions, and that decision-making capacity is sort of like a storage of energy that depletes throughout the day, you begin to have a more scientific or more mechanical understanding of it. So specifically, your ability to make decisions is based on being well rested and based on glucose in the bloodstream, sugar in the bloodstream, which comes from foods. So in Chapter 7, what I describe is a specific framework to make sure that you sustain high energy and you sustain a level of what you can call energy governance that allows you to maintain willpower throughout the day, that reminds you to stay clear-headed, stay focused, and stay energized throughout the day. Because the same energy you use to make any decision is the same energy you use to make any decision relative to your goals. The same energy you use to make a distinguishing or a delineation between a financial choice is the same energy you'll use to stay motivated to exercise later in the day. Generally, people are overwhelmed and they're taxing their willpower capacity early in the day. They're not creating routines, they're not eating the right foods, they're not taking breaks in the right structure or in the right framework. So when it becomes time to set a goal or to work on a more important life project or a more important long-term project, there has to be a certain framework or a certain structure to how that energy is governed rather than just used haphazardly, if that makes sense.
Very interesting. In addition, can we speak about the chapter on motivation?
Yeah, well, like I said in previous videos, 75% of motivation is non-motivational. So in the same way that most communication is nonverbal, most of it's body language, voice tone, the context you're saying it in, a lot of what you're motivated or not motivated by has to do with factors you'd never associate with your sense of ambition. Most people, when they want to be motivated, they think in terms of inspiration. They think in terms of encouragement. They think they have to hear a certain song, read a certain book, watch a certain movie, or do something to fire themselves up. And that works, but it only works in the short term. That's something you do to give yourself a little burst. If you want to be motivated in the sense of having motivation, an internal part of you, you need to rewire or rethink certain aspects of your life. Specifically your unconscious beliefs, your sense of purpose, your sense of principle, your sense of code, and also your unique talents and strengths. The more you can circulate, or the more you can revolve your skills around talents and strengths rather than just normal activities or interests that other people in the social world condition you to have, the more likely you'll be motivated. The more you can the more your life reflects what you want it to reflect rather than other people, the more you'll be motivated. You can't be driven to live a life if it's really just a replication of what other people are telling you to be or other people are telling you to do. And there are a lot of people in this world, people who are 40, 50, 60 years old, who spend their entire lives trying to validate themselves or gain approval from other people, including sometimes your own parents, or your own friends, people that do genuinely care about you. But to be motivated, you have to go through a certain level of self-exploration. To be motivated, you need to know yourself in a certain way so that you can set your life up and set your goals up in a way that reflect that identity, that reflect that unique sense of purpose, that unique sense of code, and that unique sense of strength, or that unique sense of talent. And being motivated is about knowing yourself. Motivation is constructed internally from your sense of identity, not from external points of references. So again, nothing's wrong with watching an inspirational movie. Nothing's wrong with getting inspiration or encouragement from outside sources. But if you want to be motivated for the long term, you need to think about how you can wire it into your identity. Is that?
Nice, you've covered it. Okay, the chapter, let's go back to Willpower, chapter 7. I like the way you compared dating, experimented with dating as well as goals. Can you speak on that, please?
Well, there's a couple of things. Let's see. Willpower, again, is energy governance. Your willpower is your capacity to make decisions, all right? If you want to eat healthier, that's a conscious decision you have to make. Because like I talk about in the first chapter, your goals reside in the logical neocortex of your brain. The challenges you have about your goals reside in your limbic system, your amygdala, and your basal ganglia, the more primitive mammalian or reptilian aspects of your brain. So the conflicts that you need willpower for are really based off different parts of your brain that have a conflict. And in order for you to have your logic or your reasoning override your more primitive, previous evolutionary drives, you need to have a certain level of energy. You need to have glucose in your bloodstream, and you need to be well rested specifically. So to build willpower, it's important that you take frequent breaks. Our concept of breaks stems from the Industrial Revolution, where we would till the fields mechanically and do repetitive labor. Or even in factories when we would do, remember that's agrarian, right? We used to work on farms where we do repetitive labor in fields. Then we worked in factories in the Industrial Revolution where we did repetitive labor on assembly lines and such. Now we're in the digital age. So our work is more mental and our work is more psychological. The things you want to be willpowered about, generally speaking, they require you to use your mind. So because you're using your mind, you need to make sure that your mind has energy and that it's at its optimal state. You need to stay at a peak level of performance. So you have to take frequent breaks. You can only work in long periods of time, which breaks are usually structured. If at a day job, you have one break usually over long periods of time because you're doing repetitive labor. But if you're doing mental labor, if you're writing a book, if you're composing a song, designing a screenplay, editing film, etc., because that labor is mental, you need to take frequent breaks, usually no more than 90 minutes. So try to break every hour to keep your willpower up. Think about willpower as mental energy, as psychic energy. Think about it in a physiological way rather than a religious way. Not to be too long-winded, but our concept of willpower stems from the Victorian age. It stems from religious groups trying to keep hold on a population as they shifted out of religion. Because during the Industrial Revolution, I talk about this in chapter 5 of the book. During the Industrial Revolution, not only did you have people working in factories, you had people leaving farms to go live in cities. As they migrated into the cities, because their social networks became more dynamic and more explosive, their identities became more liberal. So people began to lose a sense of, if I do this, the priest is going to know, my family's going to know, the neighbors who've known me my whole life is going to know. People moving into cities began to become more independent, and they began to become less religious. And so willpower was a phraseology that the church used to speak to those people because the normal religious language didn't speak to them anymore. So unless you free yourself from that religious notion of willpower, not saying that there's anything wrong with religion, but if you think about willpower more in scientific terms rather than this virtue that you must have. Most people, they think if they don't have willpower, then something is like wrong with them and they judge themselves for it. Most people think about willpower as if it's like honesty or confidence. They think about it as an internal character trait rather than a dynamic that's energetic in nature. Does that make sense?
Yes.
So think about your willpower as an energy source that's essentially psychic or essentially mental. And think about preserving mental energy by making sure you eat a lot of low glycemic foods. Things like apples and nuts, they're low glycemic, meaning that the sugar they contain, the nutrients they contain, distribute through your bloodstream slowly and more evenly and consistently over time. So you eat something like an apple, you'll have mental energy like for the next 3 hours, you'll be good. If you eat something like chips or caffeine or sugar, you'll have mental energy maybe for like 10 minutes and you'll crash. So that mental energy is the same energy. Remember that you're using your logic to override your emotions and your physical drives. Generally speaking, because we're human beings, our reptilian brain and our mammalian brain have more control over our logic where our goals reside. So you have to flip that dynamic, if that's clear.
Yes, very clear. So, to conclude, do you have any words of inspiration for your readers?
My favorite quote of all time is by the Chinese philosopher Lao Tzu. He wrote the Tao Te Ching, and he says, "Knowing others is intelligence, but knowing yourself is true wisdom. Conquering others is strength, but to conquer yourself is true power." Right? Knowing others, that's intelligence. Knowing yourself, that's the true wisdom. Conquering others, that's strength, but to conquer yourself is the true power. So have true power. Conquer yourself. Even if you don't get the book, just remember the message. Conquer yourself. Like, get yourself under control. And that's...
Thank you.
Thank you.